Right, so Michael Gove. Yes, we are talking about the right Michael Gove here. Yes, that Michael Gove. Funny glasses, jowls. If you're my age, you might think he looks a bit like the puppet Pob from Channel 4. Remember that? May or may not be seen in nightclubs, dad dancing. There could be some white powder involved. Who can say? Who knows what it is? I couldn't possibly comment. Damo, you might be thinking, have you hit your head a bit too hard? Go for lefty? But bear with me, this isn't me necessarily having lost the plot, honestly. More the chagrin of Gove's fellow Tories who think he's jumped the shark and possibly given his nose a blow a bit too hard and has suffered some kind of catastrophic blood loss to the brain. Nosebleeds are terrible things. Anyway, the story concerns housing. We have a housing crisis, it's hardly news. The Tories consistently over the years have ignored it. Homelessness is severe. House prices are too high for many to buy. As mortgages soar thanks to the idiot Truss's batshit budget. Something the Chancellor at the time who delivered it, Kwasi Kwarteng, remember him, has in an interview the other day flat refused to apologise for. It's nice of him, wasn't it? The Tories have gone from selling off council housing back in Thatcher's day through John Major's time, consistently failing to replace them. Blair and Brown likewise up to David Cameron, who famously said, we can't build more social housing, we'd just be creating Labour voters if we did that. Party before country always. It's what seems to happen as a result of majority governments being able to do what they like, isn't it? The fact is, we lost masses of housing stock thanks to Right to Buy. Some 60,000 properties to date. It's expected to reach 100,000 by 2030. And they've never been replaced properly as the scheme said they would be. Well, by whatever means has made it possible, Michael Gove appears to have had a bit of an epiphany, a reality check, which is not in keeping with being a Tory at all. Almost ready to be passed into law is the Social Housing Regulation Reform Bill. It's at the final amendment stage right now, just before it goes on to receive Royal Assent. And the guts of this are pretty much common sense stuff. They shouldn't really be considered left or right issues, actually. What this bill aims to introduce are things like requiring social landlords to fix issues and hazards within a reasonable time frame. Social landlords being required to provide tenants with guidance as to how to make complaints against them, and all social housing managers be required to be qualified in the work they are undertaking. It does seem rather bizarre that that's not necessarily the case. Now, this is great. This is all well and good for those in social housing, obviously, whom this affects, but plenty of renters aren't. An awful lot of renters won't benefit from this at all. So a renters reform bill, more aimed at the private sector, is in planning stages right now, again being driven by Gove. And it's this one that's got a lot of Tories spinning rivets because lots of them are private landlords, of course. Quelle surprise! Should be obvious why these people won't deal with the housing crisis. It doesn't benefit themselves, first and foremost. Well, this bill is expected to introduce things like an end to Section 21 evictions, the no-fault evictions. So in other words, you can only be evicted for poor behaviour, antisocial behaviour, missing rent payments, which incidentally are to be made easier, but no longer can they evict you just because the landlord wants to scalp you for more rent and has to get a new tenant in order to get the money they want. New repossession grounds are to be introduced for landlords wishing to sell their properties. Tenants will be able to own pets more easily. Reasons to refuse this must be demonstrably reasonable. Landlords cannot get away with just saying no anymore. A brand new ombudsman service will be created to deal with disputes as well. More legislation is planned still to come after that, including decent housing standards, ending the slum landlord era, and end to the no DSS language of property letting, where no longer will benefit recipients be allowed to be discriminated against. I sincerely hope this future legislation does in fact materialise. But before you think I genuinely have hit my head somewhere, as I seem to be giving props to Tory housing plans here, I'm well aware that Gove is driving in a direction counter to that typical for his party. And this is why accusations of him having become a rotten lefty are emerging. Oh, won't you think of the buy-to-let landlords? You can hear the Tory backbenchers wail. Naturally, including many of themselves. The Tory graph has swung into their rescues, accusing Gove of betraying buy-to-let Britain in favour of the avocado vote. Ah, yes, renters and their pesky smashed avo on toast. The swines. They're ruining things for buy-to-let landlords. I'm not sorry about that in the slightest. Tough-icus shittikai. People need homes. Supposedly, it's the Tory dream. We all become homeowners, isn't it? No surprise Keir Starmer's humming this tune at the moment as well. He is a Tory after all, too. But the fact is you have this wealthy landlord class that has built up these property empires over decades to the detriment of the next generation who can't compete with them, and their fat wallets adding another property to their burgeoning portfolios when all the young avocado munchers want is a single home to call their own. Often these people are paying out more in rent than they would be if they had a mortgage, but are totally unable to get the mortgage because they can't afford to save for the deposit. Tory MPs are flapping though. The landlords will sell out, they bleat. The housing market will crash. Well, boo-hoo, good, it needs to. Properties are stupidly expensive, well beyond affordability, and that has to change. A rebalancing of the market is way overdue, but the Tories are instead hand-wringing over this, saying it's all a bad idea, because without buy-to-let landlords, who will rent to the renters? We'll make it easier to buy then, isn't that the dream? The property-owning democracy, as once you lot called it. Or was that another big fat Tory con? We have a full-blown housing crisis in this country. There's a woman down the road that I recently heard about who's been living in her car for 2 bloody years. But to the Tories, no, it's Corbyn housing policy, this. I don't know what Gove is thinking. Is he coked up off his tits? Free marketeers might be sobbing into their rent books right now, but they are the reason the housing market is broken. Thatcherism is a failure in so many ways, but when it's a basic, like a roof over your head, reality has to dawn somewhere. As much as by rights it should be, and you ought to expect it to be Labour setting about fixing this, instead the Tories via Gove seem to have woken up to things first. Both sides full of landlords as they are these days, it hardly makes much difference which of the main two parties do something. But as long as something gets done, because things are worse than ever now. Likely why things are coming to a head. Multiple idiotic Bank of England interest rate hikes in the name of combating inflation have seen mortgage repayments soar, buy-to-let landlords driven to sell up or hiking renters' rents where they can and evicting where they can't. Then, of course, in amongst that, the Liz Truss budget that I mentioned before made things massively worse, with mortgages now having doubled or tripled from a year ago. Housing is now more expensive to rent and buy than ever in British history. It's not a lefty idea to recognise that. It's bloody obvious that it needs to be fixed, and only those driven by personal greed should be against any measures brought in to try and address it. On its own, this is a start. There's no getting away from the fact that as much as better regulation of the housing market as this is absolutely necessary, more homes simply have to be built as well. There is no escaping that fact either. So far, the Tories are still shying away from that, just as they have for decades. That has to change too. Starmer's lot want to build, but have announced plans to do so on the green belt, so they need to think a bit harder as well, frankly. That shouldn't be the go-to policy choice. Brownfield sites in need of regeneration should always come first, but in both cases, Tory and Labour, how far things get taken from here is to be seen, as neither have much of a track record for honesty and integrity or for delivery. Gove might be minded to try, but will his own party let him? Of course, inflation hasn't just hammered mortgage payers, by extension renters, but in their case, it can be linked directly to interest rate hikes by the Bank of England as well. They keep doing it over and over again, a dozen times now, and they're wrong. And once you've liked, shared, and subscribed, of course, because you got this far through the video, so do please support the channel. But you can stick with it and watch this video explaining exactly why I think the Bank of England is led by a complete Burke to keep doing this. And I'll see you next time. Cheers, folks.